You took a bullet for me. You don't even know my name. Why would anyone do that? The boy is bleeding out on the floor of a diner, and the girl holding his head in her lap keeps asking him that same question over and over, like the answer might stop the blood. It won't. Nothing will, except the truth. She's about to whisper the truth that will bring 100 motorcycles roaring into this dying little city before the sirens even arrive. Ethan Cole thought he was invisible. He thought no one would ever notice a quiet scholarship kid with holes in his shoes. He was wrong. And the man who's about to notice him is the most dangerous man in the state. Before we go on, if you believe that one single act of courage can rewrite a person's entire life, take a second to subscribe to the channel, follow this story all the way to the end, and comment the name of the city you're watching from right now, so I can see just how far this story travels. Now let's begin. Ethan Cole had a rule, and the rule had kept him alive for 17 years. Don't be seen. He learned it early. He learned it the year his father left and didn't say goodbye. He learned it deeper the year his mother stopped getting out of bed, and deeper still the year the state paperwork started arriving, and his grandmother, 68 years old with hands that shook, sat him down at the kitchen table and said, "Ethan, honey, it's just you and me now. We have to be smart. We have to be quiet." So he was quiet. At Lincoln High, he moved through the halls like a rumor of a person. He knew which stairwells were empty at which hours. He knew that if you sat in the third row and answered nothing and volunteered nothing, teachers forgot your face by June. He carried a 4.0 that no one had ever congratulated him for. He wore the same gray hoodie until the cuffs turned to string, and when Devin Marsh and his friends shoved him into the lockers, he let his body go loose so the metal wouldn't hurt so much, and he said nothing, and he waited for it to end. "You're a ghost, Cole," Devin told him once, laughing. "You know that. You're already dead. You just keep walking around." Ethan hadn't answered, but he'd thought about it for weeks. The only place the rule relaxed was Old Joe's Burger Joint, 3 blocks from the school on the corner, where the good part of the neighborhood gave up and turned into the bad part. Joe Petrakis had owned it for 30 years. He was a wide, bald man with a gray mustache and a voice like a truck downshifting, and for reasons Ethan never understood, Joe liked him. "There he is," Joe would say every afternoon without fail. "The scholar. Sit. You eat, then you study. On the house today. Joe, you say on the house every day. And every day you argue with me. Sit down before I change my mind." Ethan sat in the back booth, the one by the window that faced the street, and he did his homework, and he ate whatever Joe pushed across the counter, and for 2 hours a day, he let himself feel almost like a normal person. It was the closest thing to a home he had. He would have died before he admitted that out loud. Then, one Tuesday in October, the girl showed up. He noticed her the way you notice weather changing a pressure in the room, a shift. She came in at exactly 3:40, sat 2 booths down, ordered a black coffee she never finished, and looked at nothing. Blonde hair pulled back tight. A coat that cost more than his grandmother's monthly disability check. She had the stillness of someone who had been taught very carefully not to react to anything. "You know who that is?" Joe murmured, refilling Ethan's water. "No. Maya Lawson. Transfer. Came in September." Joe glanced at her, and something crossed his face. Ethan would only understand it much later. "You leave that one alone, scholar. You hear me? Whatever you're thinking, don't." "I'm not thinking anything." "Good. Keep it that way." But Ethan did think something. He thought, "She looks the way I feel." Alone in a room full of people building walls out of silence, hoping no one would knock. She came the next day, and the next. Same time, same booth, same coffee going cold. She never spoke to anyone. Kids at school whispered that she was stuck up, that she thought she was better than everyone, that she'd gotten some girl suspended in her first week. Ethan didn't believe the whispers because he knew exactly what it was like to have a story told about you by people who had never once said hello. For 8 days they existed in the same small room and never spoke a word. On the 9th day, everything he'd built his life around fell apart. It started with the car. Ethan saw it because seeing things was his talent, the survival skill of a boy who'd spent his childhood reading A House for Danger. A gray sedan, 4 doors, dull paint windows tinted a shade too dark. It rolled past old Joe's slow. Too slow. Then it turned the corner and was gone. He went back to his calculus. Told himself it was nothing. 9 minutes later, it came back. Same car, same crawl. This time it slowed almost to a stop across the street, and Ethan's whole body went cold in a way he couldn't explain, the way an animal knows before the storm that it needs to run. His pencil stopped moving. "Joe," he said quietly. "What?" "That car. The gray one. It's been by 3 times." Joe leaned over the counter and squinted through the window. The sedan idled a moment longer, then eased forward and disappeared again down the block. "Kids cruising," Joe said. But his voice had changed. "Probably nothing." "You don't think it's nothing?" Joe didn't answer. He looked at Mia Lawson in her booth, and then he looked back at the door, and Ethan watched something like fear move across the big man's face. And Joe Petrakis was not a man who was afraid of things. "Ethan?" Joe said his real name, not Scholar, and that alone made the hair on Ethan's arms stand up. "I want you to get your things. I want you to go out the back. Through the kitchen. Right now." "What, why?" "Don't ask me why, just... Is it about her?" Ethan's eyes went to Mia. She'd noticed the tone in the room now. She'd gone rigid, her cold composure cracking into something younger and more frightened. "Joe, is that car here for her?" "Boy, I'm asking you one time. Go." But Ethan didn't go. He would spend the rest of his life unable to fully explain why he didn't go. Maybe because leaving felt like abandoning the only person in the room who looked as alone as he did. Maybe because 17 years of running and hiding and going loose against the lockers had built up in him like water behind a dam, and some part of him was tired, bone-tired of being a ghost who kept walking around. He stood up. He didn't run for the back. He took a step toward Mia's booth. "Hey," he said. His voice cracked. "Hey, I think you should..." That was when the gray sedan came back for the 4th time, and this time it did not slow down. Slow. This time it braked hard, right in front of the window tires, shrieking, and the back passenger window came down, and Ethan saw the thing his whole nervous system had been screaming about for the last 20 minutes. A hand. And in the hand, dark and flat and impossible, a gun. Later, when people asked him what he was thinking in that second, and many people would ask, Ethan always told the truth, which was that he wasn't thinking anything at all. There was no decision. There was no brave voice in his head. There was only Mia Lawson, sitting 12 feet away, frozen, her coffee cup halfway to her lips, her eyes going wide as she saw it too. And then there was Ethan's body moving before his mind could catch up. 17 years of held-back motion, releasing all at once, 12 feet of cheap linoleum vanishing under his feet. He heard Joe scream, "Get down!" He heard the first shot, flat and enormous, a sound that seemed to press the air out of the whole world. And then he was on her, his arms wrapped around Mia Lawson, a girl whose voice he had never once heard, and his weight drove her sideways and down out of the booth and onto the floor, and he put his back to the window and his body over hers, and the world came apart. He would never remember it as sound. He would remember it as pressure. The window didn't break so much as it disappeared, becoming 1,000 flying pieces of light. Something hot and terrible punched him high in the shoulder, and spun something loose inside his chest. Another punch lower in his side, and it stole the wind clean out of him. He heard Mia's voice underneath him, muffled against his collarbone, screaming, not words, just terror, raw and animal. Then the engine roared, and the tires shrieked again, and the gray sedan was gone, and the diner was silent, except for the small sounds. A coffee cup rolling on the floor. Glass settling. Somebody's ragged breathing that Ethan slowly understood was his own. "Ethan?" Joe was there, huge and heaving on his knees. "Ethan? Oh God, oh God." "I'm okay," Ethan tried to say, but what came out was thin and wet and wrong. He looked down at himself. That was a mistake. There was too much red. It didn't look like it belonged to him. It didn't look real. "Don't move him," Joe barked at somebody. "Call 911. Somebody call 911. And then Mia's face swam up in front of Ethan's, and he thought distantly that it was the first time he'd ever really looked at her up close. Her composure was gone. The ice was gone. There was only a shaking, terrified girl with his blood on her hands and her cheeks, and she was holding his head off the floor, and she was saying she didn't know his name. She was just saying, you stay with me, please. You have to stay." "Ethan," he told her. He didn't know why it mattered. It just seemed important that somebody in that room say his real name back to him. "It's Ethan." "Ethan." She said it like a vow. "Ethan, okay. Okay. You're going to be fine, you hear me? Ambulance is coming. You just have to... Why did you..." Her voice broke apart completely. "Why did you do that? You don't even know me. Why would you do that?" He didn't have an answer that made sense, so he gave her the only true thing he had. "You looked," he whispered, "like you didn't have anybody either." Something happened in her face then, something that would haunt Ethan far longer than any bullet, a look of pure, cracked open grief, as if he'd reached into her chest and named the exact thing she'd spent months pretending wasn't true. "You stupid, stupid boy." She wept and pulled his head against her and rocked him like her whole world was ending. "You beautiful, stupid boy. You don't know what you just..." Sirens, now far off, but coming. Joe was pressing his own folded apron against Ethan's side, leaning his whole weight on it, murmuring, "Stay awake, scholar, stay with me, don't you dare do this to me." But the room was going soft at the edges. The light was pulling back like a tide. Ethan felt cold in a way he'd never been cold before. A cold that came from somewhere underneath his skin. And he understood with a strange calm, that frightened him more than pain would have, that this might be the end of it. 17 years of being invisible, and this was how he became visible, bleeding out on the floor of the one place that had ever felt like home. He thought of his grandmother, her shaking hands. Who would sit with her now? Who would argue with the state paperwork? The thought was so unbearable that he almost stayed awake out of pure guilt. "My grandma," he managed. "Somebody has to, she's alone. I'll take care of her," Mia said instantly, fiercely gripping his face. "I swear to God, Ethan, I swear nothing is going to happen to your grandmother. Do you understand me? Not now, not ever. You saved my life, so I am telling you, you are under protection now. You don't even know what that means yet. But you will." He didn't understand. He was too far gone to understand. But he heard the certainty in her voice, the strange absolute authority in it, so out of place in a shaking teenage girl, and some small awake part of him thought, "Who are you?" And that was when Mia Lawson leaned close to his ear, close enough that only he could hear, and said the words that would set everything that came after into motion, the words that would change the entire course of Ethan Cole's short, invisible, extraordinary life. "Ethan, listen to me. Listen. My father is coming. And when my father finds out what happened here..." Her voice dropped to something cold and old and certain, something that did not belong to a 17-year-old girl at all. "Dad is going to kill them, every last one of them. He's going to burn this whole city down looking, and he is not going to stop. You have no idea who you just saved. You have no idea what you just started." The sirens were close now, filling the street, painting the walls in red and blue. But underneath the sirens, underneath them, rolling in from somewhere far off across the dying city, like distant thunder that would not stop building. Ethan heard another sound. A deeper sound. A sound like 100 engines. Motorcycles. Dozens of them. Coming fast. Coming here. Mia lifted her head toward that sound, and her tear-streaked face changed once more. The fear draining out of it, replaced by something Ethan had no name for. Relief. Dread. And something that looked terrifyingly like the calm of a girl who had just called down a storm. "They're coming," she whispered. "Oh, Ethan, they're already coming." His grandmother's shaking hands. Joe's weight on his side. The blood that didn't look like his. Mia Lawson's voice saying his name like it mattered. The thunder of engines swallowing the sirens whole. And then, The light pulled all the way back, and the cold took him. And the last thing Ethan Cole knew before the darkness closed over his head was the roar of something enormous arriving, and the strange, impossible feeling for the first time in his entire life that he was not alone. The engines were close now, very close, and they were not slowing down. Orchestrated, emotionally driven narrative continuation with dialogue, heavy pacing, and psychological depth. Orchestrated, emotionally driven narrative continuation with dialogue, heavy pacing, and psychological depth. The engines didn't slow down because engines like those never slowed down for anyone. They owned the street. They took it. Ethan didn't hear them arrive. He was already gone, folded down into the dark, and the last of his blood was making a map across the floor of Old Joe's while Mia Lawson knelt in it and refused to let go of his head. She heard them, though. She heard the thunder swell until the plate glass still clinging to the window frame buzzed and rattled, and then the thunder cut out all at once, a dozen kill switches thrown in the same second, and the silence after was somehow worse. Then boots. A lot of boots. "Where is she?" A voice roared from the doorway, and it was a voice that did not ask twice. "Where is my daughter?" "Daddy." Mia's composure, the thing that had made the whole school hate her, shattered like the window had. She didn't move. She couldn't. She wouldn't let Ethan's head touch that floor, but her whole body turned toward the sound. "Daddy over here. He's hurt. He's hurt bad. You have to help him." Rocco Lawson crossed that diner in 4 steps. He was not a large man, and that was the first thing that scared people about him, because they expected large, and got something worse. Something compact and gray-eyed, and completely terribly still, a stillness that had been earned in rooms most people would never survive walking into. The leather vest he wore had a bottom rocker that read the name of a club everyone in that city said only in a whisper. The top rocker said what he was. The patch in the middle said what he'd done to get there. He dropped to his knees beside his daughter, and for 1/2 of 1 second, the only half-second anyone present would ever see it. Rocco, the Iron. Lawson looked like nothing but a terrified father, his hands hovering over her, patting her shoulders, her arms, her face. "Are you hit, Mia? Look at me. Are you hit?" "No. No, Daddy. I'm fine. It's not my blood." "Whose blood is it?" Mia's chin trembled. "His." Rocco's eyes went for the first time to the boy in his daughter's lap, to the gray hoodie gone black-red, to the face gone the color of old paper, the eyes shut, the chest rising in little sips that were getting smaller. "This kid." Rocco's voice had dropped into something flat and quiet, and the men standing behind him, 6 of them filling the doorway, blocking the light, went very still because they knew that voice. "Mia, who is this kid?" "His name is Ethan." She was crying again, and she hated crying in front of her father, hated it, and she couldn't stop. "The car came back, Daddy, the gray one, the one Tommy told you about, and there was a gun, and I froze. I froze. I couldn't move. And he—" Her voice climbed and cracked. "He was all the way across the room, Daddy. He didn't know me. We never even talked. And he ran at the window. He ran toward it. He got on top of me. He took them. He took the bullets that were coming for me." Something moved through Rocco Lawson's face. Not softness. It was too hard and too old to be softness. But it was the neighbor of softness. It was the look of a man rearranging his entire understanding of the world in real time. "He took your rounds," Rocco said. "He took my rounds. A boy who doesn't know you. A boy who doesn't know me." Rocco looked down at Ethan for a long moment. Then he did something that made his own men flinch. He took off his gloves. "Petrakis," he said, not turning around. Joe stumbled forward. "Rocco, I swear to God I tried to get him out the back. I told him I know you did." Rocco's hands were already on Ethan now, one pressing where Joe's apron had soaked through, feeling the wound underneath with a gentleness that looked impossible on a man like him. "You did right, Joe. Now where the hell is that ambulance?" "Coming. 2 minutes, they said, maybe 3. 3 minutes. Rocco's jaw worked. He looked at the gray of Ethan's lips and he made a calculation that men in his life had learned to trust with their own blood. This boy does not have 3 minutes. Daddy. Bear. Rocco snapped the word over his shoulder, and one of the mountains in the doorway detached itself and came forward, a bald giant with a beard down to his chest and forearms like fence posts. You still got that trauma kit on the bike. The real one. Go. Bear was gone, and back in 11 seconds with a canvas roll. And what happened next? Mia would never forget. As long as she lived, her father, the man the whole city was afraid of. The man who had never once in her memory raised his voice above that flat, quiet register, tore open a package of white gauze with his teeth, and packed a stranger's bullet wound with the steady hands of a man who had in some other life she'd never been allowed to ask about, done this many times before. Come on, kid, Rocco muttered. Come on, you did a hard thing today. Don't you quit on the easy part. He said something, Mia whispered, before he went under. I asked him why he did it. What'd he say? Mia's face crumpled. He said I looked like I didn't have anybody either. Rocco's hand stopped for exactly 1 heartbeat. Then they kept moving faster, and when he spoke again, his voice had a new thing in it, a low-banked heat that his men had heard maybe 3 times in 15 years, and that had every single time ended with someone disappearing off the face of the earth. Is that right? Rocco said softly. Is that right? The ambulance made it in 2 minutes and 40 seconds. The paramedics came through the door and stopped dead at the sight of 6 Hells Angels standing over a shooting victim, and Rocco stood and looked at them and said one sentence: You keep this boy breathing, and you will never buy your own dinner in this city again. Do you understand me? And something in his face made them move faster than they had ever moved in their lives. They loaded Ethan onto the gurney. Mia would not let go of his hand, and nobody made her. Rocco walked beside the gurney all the way to the doors and only stopped when a paramedic said gently that there wasn't room in the rig. Mia rides with him, Rocco said. It was not a request. Sir, we really can only... Mia rides with him. Mia rode with him, and as the doors of the ambulance closed on his daughter and the dying boy, she wouldn't stop touching. Rocco Lawson stood alone in the wreckage of Old Joe's burger joint, with the blood still tacky on his hands, and he turned slow and looked at his men, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Tommy, he said. A wiry man near the door came forward. VP, you told me 2 weeks ago there was chatter, that the Salucci people were feeling brave, that maybe somebody was thinking about doing something stupid to send me a message. Rocco's gray eyes were absolutely calm, and that was the most frightening thing about them. You remember telling me that Tommy... I remember. And I said... Tommy swallowed. You said they wouldn't dare. I said they wouldn't dare. Rocco nodded slowly. He looked down at his red hands. I was wrong. I want you to sit with that Tommy, because I don't get to be wrong. Not about this. Not about her. My being wrong just put 4 holes in a 17-year-old kid who never did a single thing to anybody in his life except get up every morning and go to school. His voice never rose. It got quieter, and quieter was worse. So here's what's going to happen now. Nobody breathed. I want the sedan. Gray 4-door, and Petrakis says the boy clocked it circling 4 times before it hit. So somebody in this city saw that car park somewhere. Get gas. Somewhere. Turn a corner in front of a camera. Somewhere. I want it by tomorrow. I want the shooter. I want the driver. I want whoever handed them the address of the diner my daughter has been sitting in every afternoon for a month, because that means somebody was watching her, and somebody was reporting on her, and that person is a dead man walking who does not know it yet. Rocco pulled his gloves back on 1 finger at a time. And I want it done quiet, and I want it done right, and nobody moves on anybody until I give the word. Because when we do this, we do it once, and we do it so that no one in the history of this city ever again looks twice at a girl with my last name. Are we clear? 6 men answered as one. Clear, VP. Good. Rocco walked to the door, then stopped and looked back one more time at the booth where it had happened, at the bloodstain at the coffee cup still lying on its side where it had rolled. And somebody find out that boy's name, his whole name, where he lives, who he's got. Everything. His voice did something strange on the last part, something almost human. He's got a grandmother. Mia said he's got a grandmother, and he's worried about her even now, even bleeding out. He's worried about somebody else. Find her. Nobody touches her. Nobody scares her. But from tonight, that woman does not go a single day without one of us knowing she's safe. That's an order. Yes, VP. That kid put his body between a bullet and my daughter. Rocco pushed open the door, and the last light of the afternoon caught the gray in his eyes and made them look like struck steel. I don't care what it costs. He's not going to be sorry he did it. Not while I'm breathing. And then he was gone, and a moment later, the engines came alive again all at once, that thunder rolling up out of the street and pouring away into the city hunting. The hospital was a different kind of war. Ethan went straight into surgery, and Mia sat in a plastic chair in a hallway, with his blood dried brown on her hands and her sleeves, and refused flatly to go clean up, because cleaning up felt like admitting he might not come back out, and she would not admit that. A nurse tried 3 times to get her to move. On the 4th, Rocco arrived, and the nurse stopped trying. "Any word?" Rocco said, lowering himself into the chair beside his daughter. "Nothing. He's still in there. It's been 3 hours." Mia's voice was hollowed out. "They said one bullet nicked his lung. They said the other one was close to something they didn't want it close to. They keep using that word. Close. I hate that word now." Rocco didn't say it would be fine. He was not a man who lied, and especially not to her. He just took his daughter's ruined hand in both of his and held it. "I froze Daddy." The confession came out of her small and ashamed. "I always thought you raised me around all this. I always thought if it ever came, I'd know what to do. I'd be brave. I'd be a Lawson." Her face twisted. "And it came and I just sat there. I watched the gun come up and I couldn't move a single muscle. If it wasn't for him, I'd be dead. A boy I never even said hello to would be alive right now, and I'd be dead, and that's just the truth of it. Mia, look at me." She looked. "Freezing isn't cowardice. You hear me? I've watched grown men, hard men, men with patches lock up solid the first time it goes loud. It's the animal in you. It's older than you. It's not a flaw in your character." Rocco's thumb moved over her knuckles. "But I'll tell you what is a flaw in a person's character. Being able to move and not moving. Seeing somebody in trouble across a room and deciding it's not your problem. That's the flaw." He looked toward the surgery doors. That boy could have gone out the back. Petrakis gave him the door. He had the door, Mia, and he walked away from it toward you, toward the gun. You understand what that is? That's not luck, and that's not instinct. That's the rarest thing there is. That's a person who is built right. Mia started crying again quietly this time. What if built right just gets him killed? What if I got him killed by sitting in that stupid diner every day because it was the only place all month nobody looked at me like I was a monster's daughter? Rocco flinched. It was so small only she would have caught it. Is that what they say about you? At that school? It doesn't matter. Is that what they say? Mia was quiet a moment. They say a lot of things, Daddy. That's why I sat alone. That's why I went to the diner. Nobody there knew whose kid I was. For 1 hour a day, I got to just be a girl drinking coffee. And that boy in there, Ethan, he was the only other person in that whole place who ever looked like he understood what that felt like. To be in a room full of people and completely alone. Her voice broke. And now, he's in there because of it. Rocco Lawson sat with that for a long time. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped. A gurney rolled past. And a man who had built his entire life on the principle that the world was a hard place, that owed you nothing, and would take everything found sitting in that plastic chair, something shifting in the foundation of him. When he comes out of there, Rocco said finally, and he is going to come out of there, I'm going to have a conversation with that boy. And you're going to let me have it my way. Understand? What kind of conversation? The kind where I find out who taught a 17-year-old with nothing to run toward a gun for a stranger. Rocco's jaw set. Because somebody did. And whoever it was, they did a hell of a job, and I'd like to shake their hand. Or their memory. It was nearly midnight when the surgeon finally came out, and she was still in her cap pulling down her mask, and she looked exhausted, and she looked, thank God, she looked like a woman with good news. Are you the family? Mia was on her feet before the woman finished the sentence. Is he alive? Is he okay? Please. He's alive. A tired smile. He's a very, very lucky young man, and a very stubborn one. Twice on the table he dropped on us, and twice he came back on his own, which frankly I don't see often. We got both bullets, the one near his heart. The surgeon exhaled an inch, maybe less. I've been doing this 20 years, and I don't like to use the word miracle because it makes my colleagues roll their eyes. I'm going to use it anyway. That inch is a miracle. Mia put both hands over her mouth and sank back into the chair and sobbed, and Rocco caught her, and over her shaking shoulders, he looked at the surgeon, with an expression the surgeon would tell her husband about. Later that night, an expression she couldn't quite name, except that it made her stand up a little straighter. Whatever he needs, Rocco said. The best of everything. The room, the recovery, the physical therapy, the follow-ups, all of it. Send it to me. Don't send it anywhere near his family. You understand? Not a single bill touches those people. Sir, I'm not sure the billing office can just... They'll figure it out. Rocco stood and buttoned his vest. Can she see him? He's not awake yet. It'll be hours. But... The surgeon looked at Mia, at the blood on her, at the way she was still crying. Yes, she can sit with him. I think that might be good for both of them. They moved Ethan to a private room on the 4th floor, and 2 men in leather took up position outside the door without being asked, and without leaving all night, and Mia pulled a chair to the side of the bed, and took the hand that didn't have a line in it, and she settled in, and she did not go home. Rocco stood in the doorway a while watching his daughter watch the sleeping boy. He'd seen her cold for months. He'd seen her build those walls after the divorce, after the moves, after every time being his daughter cost her a friend to school, a chance at being normal. He'd watched her turn to ice because ice couldn't be hurt. And now in one afternoon a stranger had walked through all of it, and Rocco could see the ice was gone, and it was not coming back, and he did not know yet whether that was a gift or a wound. You should sleep, he told her. I'm not leaving. I know. Just telling you that you should. He almost smiled. You've got my stubborn. I've got your everything, Daddy. That's the problem. She said it without heat, just tired truth still holding Ethan's hand. Go find them. The ones who did this. I know that's where you're going. Go do it. And when he wakes up, I want to be able to tell him it's handled. I want him to know it wasn't for nothing. Rocco looked at her for a long moment. It wasn't for nothing, he said. Whatever else happens, it already wasn't for nothing. And he left, and the hunt that would take apart half the underworld of that city began that night in earnest. But Ethan Cole slept through all of it, floating somewhere far under the surface, unaware that his invisible life had already ended, and something else, something enormous, had already begun to grow up around him in the dark. He woke at 4 a.m. He woke the way you wake from being very deep in pieces. The ceiling first, then the sounds, the beep and hush of machines, then a terrible bone-deep ache in his chest and side that made him gasp, and the gasp hurt worse, and the fear came up all at once, because he didn't know where he was. Hey, 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 easy. A voice close and a hand tightening on his. You're okay. You're in the hospital. You're okay, Ethan. It's Mia. Do you remember me? He turned his head, and there she was, and for a second, his sluggish brain couldn't make it fit the girl from the diner, the coffee. She never drank the walls, the silence, because this girl had red eyes and messy hair and dried blood on her sleeves, and was looking at him like he was the most important thing on earth. You're the girl, he rasped. His throat felt like gravel. Mia. Yeah? She laughed and it came out wet. Yeah, the girl. You saved the girl. You stupid incredible, you saved my life, Ethan. It came back to him then, all at once. The car and the window and the gun and the 12 feet, and his heart monitor jumped, and Mia squeezed his hand harder. No, no, it's over. It's done. They ran. You're safe. I'm safe. We're both okay. You did it. You got me down. Her voice thickened. You took 4 bullets doing it, you lunatic, but you did it. 4. Ethan repeated dully. He tried to move and his whole body sent up a flare of protest. Am I the doctor? Am I gonna... You're going to be fine. They said miracle. An actual doctor said the word miracle. One of them was right by your heart, Ethan, an inch, and you're still here. So I've decided you're impossible to kill, and I'm never going to worry about you again. She was crying and laughing at the same time now. Don't ever do that to me again. I mean it. I don't even know you, and I've never been that scared in my whole life. Ethan looked at her, at this girl he'd never spoken to before yesterday, weeping over him at 4 a.m, and something moved in his chest that had nothing to do with the bullets. It was a feeling so foreign he almost didn't recognize it. Someone had stayed. Someone had been afraid for him. In 17 years of being a ghost, no one outside his grandmother had ever once looked at him the way this girl was looking at him now. My grandma? He said suddenly, and the panic spiked again. Mia, my grandma, she's home alone. She can't manage without me. If I didn't come home last night, she's okay. Mia leaned in. Ethan, listen to me. She is okay, I promise you. My father sent people, good people. They found her. They told her, you're alive. They're taking care of everything. And there's a man sitting outside her building right now, making sure nobody bothers her. She's not alone. Not anymore. Not ever again, if my father has anything to say about it. Your father. Something in the way she said it. The 2 men in leather he could just see through the door glass. The strange certainty in her voice, the same certainty from the diner floor, the thing that had made him think, who are you, even as the darkness took him? Mia, who's your father? Mia went still. She'd known this moment was coming. She'd known it would come the second he was awake enough to ask, and she'd been dreading it, because in her experience, this was the moment. This was where they changed. This was where the warmth in someone's face turned to fear, or worse, to the greedy, calculating look of someone realizing what she could do for them. She'd lost every friend she'd ever had to this exact moment. And now she had to say it to the one person who had ever run toward danger for her, and she was terrified of what his face would do. Ethan, she said carefully. The men outside the door, the motorcycles you might have heard before you passed out. The reason your grandmother is safe and your hospital bills are already paid and nobody is ever going to hurt either one of us again. She took a breath. My father is Rocco Lawson. They call him the Iron. He's the vice president of the Hells Angels. She watched his face. She braced for it. Ethan blinked slowly. The motorcycle club. The motorcycle club everybody in this city is afraid of. Yeah, that one. Her jaw was tight defensive, already armored for rejection. The car that shot you. It wasn't random, Ethan. It wasn't some gang thing you got caught in. They were there for me. Somebody wanted to hurt my father by hurting me, and you... Her voice cracked. You got in the way of it without even knowing what you were getting in the way of. You took bullets meant to send a message to one of the most dangerous men alive. So, that's who my father is. That's what you saved me from. And I understand if that changes things. Everybody I've ever met, the second they find out, it changes. Is he gonna come see me? Mia stopped. What? Your dad. Ethan's eyes were huge and pale, and she realized not afraid, worried. Is he mad that I got involved? I didn't know. If I'd known you were somebody important, I still would've, I think. But is he gonna be mad that some nobody kid put his hands on his daughter? And Mia Lawson looked at the boy in the hospital bed. The boy who had just learned he'd taken 4 bullets for the daughter of the most feared man in the city, and whose very first thought, His very first fear was whether that man was angry at him, and she started to cry so hard she couldn't speak, because in that instant she understood completely why her father had taken off his gloves on that diner floor. "No," she finally managed, gripping his hand with both of hers. "No, Ethan, he's not mad. He is the opposite of mad. You have no idea. You have no idea what you did or who you did it for or what it's about to mean for the rest of your life." She wiped her face uselessly. "You've been invisible your whole life, haven't you? That's what I saw in that diner. That's why you understood me. Because you were a ghost, too." Ethan didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence was the answer, and it broke her heart clean in half. "Well, you're not anymore," Mia whispered fiercely. "That's over. As of yesterday afternoon, that is over forever, and I need you to understand that, because the man walking through that door in about 6 hours is going to look at you like you're the most important person he's met in 10 years, and he's going to mean it, and it is going to change everything." She brought his knuckles up and pressed them against her forehead, holding them there. "You saved my life. In my family, Ethan, that is a debt of blood, and a Lawson always pays." Down on the street, 4 floors below, the first gray light of morning was coming up over the broken city, and a single motorcycle idled at the curb, its rider watching the hospital doors, keeping the promise that no one had asked him to make. And in a small apartment across town, an old woman with shaking hands sat by her window, where a stranger in a leather vest had an hour before brought her hot soup and told her gently that her grandson was a hero and that she would never want for anything again as long as she lived. And she did not fully understand it, but she believed it because the man's eyes had been kind and certain, and she had cried into her soup with relief. And somewhere out in that same waking city, in a garage that smelled of oil and fear, 3 men who had circled a diner in a gray sedan were beginning slowly to understand that they had made the worst mistake of their lives, that the boy they'd assumed was dead was very much alive, that the girl had lived, and that Rocco, the Iron Lawson, now knew their faces. They had perhaps one day left. They did not know it yet, but Rocco did. Rocco knew because Rocco had spent his whole life learning how to know things. By the time the sun was full up over the city, Tommy had a name. By 9 that morning, he had 3. And by the time Rocco pushed open the door of Ethan's hospital room at 10:30, still in yesterday's vest, still with a hardness in his eyes that hadn't slept, he already knew exactly who had put 4 holes in the boy, lying in that bed, and he had made himself a promise about it that he intended to keep to the letter. But he didn't come in like that. He came in quiet. Mia looked up from the chair she hadn't left. "Daddy?" "Hey, baby." His voice gentled the second he looked at her. Then it moved to the bed, to the boy propped up against the pillows, pale and thin and awake, watching him with those big, careful eyes, and something in Rocco's chest did a slow, unfamiliar turn. "So, you're the one." Ethan's heart monitor ticked up. Mia saw it and squeezed his hand. "Mr. Lawson," Ethan said. His voice was still gravel. I'm sorry. About getting into your business. I didn't know who she was. I want you to know I wasn't trying to—" "Stop!" Rocco held up one hand and the boy stopped. Rocco pulled the second chair around and sat down slow, and for a moment he just looked at Ethan. Really looked at him, at the kid who had run at a gun for a stranger, and he seemed to be searching for something in the boy's face. "Son, I've been trying to figure out since yesterday afternoon what I was going to say to you. I've had a lot of hours to think on it. And you know what I keep landing on?" "No, sir. Nothing." Rocco almost smiled. "I got nothing. Because there's no words for what you did. I've been around hard men my whole life. Men who'd tell you they'd take a bullet for you, and they'd mean it right up until the bullet was actually coming, and then most of them would find their feet moving the other way. That's not cowardice. That's just human. That's the body doing what bodies do." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "But you didn't even know her. You had the back door Joe told me you had a clean way out, and instead you crossed the whole room the wrong direction, toward it, for a girl who never even said hello to you." He shook his head slowly. "I've been trying to remember the last time I saw somebody do a thing that pure. And I can't. That's the truth, kid. I can't remember. Ethan didn't know what to do with any of it. His whole life, the only two adults who'd ever spoken to him with anything like this much weight in their voices were his grandmother and old Joe. And now the most feared man in the city was sitting at his bedside talking to him like he mattered. And Ethan felt his eyes sting and hated it. She looked alone, he said, because it was the only explanation he had, and because it was true. That's all. I know it's stupid. She looked like nobody had her. And I know what that's like. So He stopped. I don't know. I didn't decide it. It just happened. Rocco went very still. She looked like nobody had her, he repeated. Yes, sir. Rocco looked at his daughter. Then, and Mia looked back at him. And something passed between the two of them. Something old and painful. And Mia's eyes filled up, because she knew exactly what her father was hearing. He was hearing all the schools, all the moves, all the friends she'd lost the second they learned her last name. All the afternoons she'd sat in a diner alone drinking coffee she didn't want just to be for 1 hour. A girl nobody was afraid of. He was hearing the price his life had made his daughter pay, spoken back to him by a stranger who'd seen it clear across a room and decided it was worth his own blood to fix. How long, Rocco said, and his voice had gone rough, has my daughter been sitting alone in that diner that a boy who never met her could look at her one time and see she didn't have anybody? Nobody answered. There wasn't an answer that wouldn't hurt. Rocco rubbed a hand down his face. When he took it away, the softness was gone, tucked back down under the iron where he kept it, but Mia had seen it, and that was enough. All right, he said. All right, Ethan. I'm going to tell you how it is now, and I need you to just listen, because I don't say things like this and I'm only going to say them once. Ethan nodded. You're not going to pay for anything. Not this hospital, not the surgeries, not the physical therapy. You're going to need none of it. It's handled. Don't argue with me. It's already done. The paperwork doesn't even exist anymore. Rocco ticked it off flat and certain. Your grandmother. We found her. She's got a man on her building around the clock. She's got hot food. She's got her medications sorted, and there's a woman coming twice a day to help her with whatever she needs, and that's permanent. That's not a one-time thing. That's for as long as she's alive. You don't have to worry about her anymore. You hear me? That weight you've been carrying, I watched you wake up scared about her before you were scared about yourself. That weight is off you now. Set it down. Ethan's face crumpled and he turned his head away because he did not want to cry in front of this man, and the effort of not crying was worse than the bullets had been. And the ones who did this to you, Rocco went on quieter now, are being handled too. I'm not going to say more than that in a hospital room, but you're going to sleep easy from here on out, and so is she, and so is your grandmother, because I am going to make personally certain, that the people responsible are never in a position to threaten anybody ever again. That's a promise. And in my life, son, a promise is the only thing I've got that's worth more than money, so understand that I don't make them light. Mr. Lawson, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. Rocco stood up. He looked down at the boy for a long moment. That's exactly why I'm doing it. You didn't have to either. And then Rocco Lawson did something that made his daughter's breath catch. He put out his hand, his scarred, heavy, dangerous hand, to a 17-year-old scholarship kid in a hospital gown. And when Ethan, hesitant, unsure, put his own thin hand into it, Rocco didn't shake it. He gripped it and held it and looked the boy dead in the eyes. Thank you, Rocco said, for my daughter's life. There is nothing I will ever do for you that's equal to it. But I'm going to spend a long time trying. You're not alone anymore, Ethan. Neither of you is. Whatever else you take from all this, take that. Ethan couldn't speak. He just held onto the man's hand and nodded, and the tears came anyway, and for once in his life, he didn't try to hide them, and nobody in that room thought less of him for it. Out in the hallway a minute later, Rocco's face changed the moment the door clicked shut behind him. Tommy was waiting. VP. Talk. The sedan's a rental. Fake ID, but the ID's sloppy and Bear knows a guy at the counter. 3 men. The shooter's a kid 19. Name's Danny Reyes, low-level, does errands for the Salucci crew. The driver were still working. But the third guy, Tommy hesitated. VP, the third guy in that car is the one who's gonna matter to you. Rocco's eyes sharpened. Why? Because he's the one who knew where to find her. He's the one who had the diner. Somebody fed those idiots the exact corner Mia's been sitting at every afternoon for a month, the exact time, the exact booth. That's not something the Salucci crew figures out on their own. Somebody was watching her close for weeks and reporting it back. Tommy swallowed. Somebody who knew her routine. Somebody who could get close enough to know it without her ever noticing. The hallway went cold. You're telling me, Rocco said slowly, there's a rat. Somebody close. Somebody who sold my daughter's location to the people who tried to kill her. I'm telling you it looks that way, VP. I'm sorry. But the pattern only works one way. Somebody on the inside or close to the inside set her up. For a long moment, Rocco didn't move at all. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet Tommy had to lean in. Find him. I don't care what it takes. I don't care who it is. I don't care if it's somebody I've known 20 years and broke bread with and rode with and called brother. The words came out like they were being pulled over broken glass. Somebody in my world pointed a gun at my little girl. And I am going to find out who. And I am going to look them in the eye and then God help them. Do you understand me, Tommy? I understand, VP. Nobody says a word about this. Not to the club, not to anybody. If there's a rat, I don't want him knowing we know. We let him think it went clean, that the boy's the only problem, that we're chasing the shooter and nothing else. And meanwhile we watch. Everybody. Everybody who is close enough to know her routine. Everybody. Rocco started down the hall. Including the ones I'd trust with my own life. Especially them. Back in the room, Mia had climbed up to sit on the edge of Ethan's bed, careful of the lines and the tubes, and the two of them were quiet in the way of people who had already survived the worst thing together and didn't need to fill the silence. He likes you, Mia said, finally wondering. Ethan? I have never seen him like that with anybody. Not ever. Do you understand how rare that is? He shook your hand. He said thank you. My father doesn't say thank you. He makes other people say it to him. He's not what I thought he'd be. What did you think he'd be? Ethan considered it. Scary. Loud. Somebody who'd be mad at me for touching his kid. He looked down at his own hand, the one Rocco had held. He was scary, but not the way I thought. It's like being scared of the ocean. It's not the ocean's mad at you. It's just bigger than you, and it could kill you, and it just decided not to. Mia laughed, surprised, the first real laugh she'd laughed in 2 days. That's exactly what he is. That's exactly it. He's the ocean. Then her face went soft and serious. And you're in it now. I hope you know that. There's no going back to being invisible, Ethan. Not after this. You crossed that diner, and you walked right out of your old life. I don't think you even realize yet. Ethan was quiet, then in a small voice. I don't want to go back to it anyway. Mia looked at him. Being invisible, he said. Everybody always talks about it like it's freedom. Nobody bothers you. Nobody sees you. You just pass through. But it's not freedom, Mia. It's the loneliest thing in the world. You could disappear tomorrow, and nobody would notice for a week. His jaw tightened. I used to think that's how it was always going to be for me. Head down, stay quiet, get through it, take care of Grandma, and just not matter. To anybody. He turned his head and looked at her. And then, 2 days ago, a girl I never talked to held my head off the floor and said my name like it was important. Mia's eyes filled. It is important. Nobody ever made me feel like that before. Not in 17 years. Ethan's voice cracked. So no, I don't want to go back to being invisible. Whatever happens next, even if it's scary, even if your dad's whole world is dangerous. I'd rather be somebody who matters in a dangerous world than a ghost in a safe one. And Mia Lawson, daughter of the most feared man in the city, who had spent months turning herself to ice so nothing could touch her, leaned down and pressed her forehead gently against the forehead of the boy who had taken 4 bullets for her, and she stayed there a long moment, and neither of them said anything, because there wasn't anything that needed saying. The days that followed changed everything. Word travels in a city like that one, and it travels fastest through the places that pretend not to listen. Within 72 hours, everyone knew. They knew a shooter had lit up Old Joe's. They knew Rocco Lawson's daughter had been the target. And they knew this was the part that spread like fire, that some no-name high school kid, some nobody, scholarship boy with nothing to his name, had thrown himself in front of the bullets, and that the Iron himself had knelt in the boy's blood, and that the angels were now paying for everything and putting men on the boy's grandmother, and that Rocco had shaken the kid's hand. At Lincoln High, the news landed like a bomb. Devin Marsh heard it in the cafeteria on a Thursday, and he laughed because Devin Marsh had been shoving Ethan Cole into lockers since freshman year, and the idea that the ghost had done anything worth talking about was to him hilarious. "Cole," Devin said loud, so the table could hear. "Ethan Cole, the guy who cries if you look at him. No way that's the same kid." "It's the same kid, man." His friend's face was pale. "My cousin was there. He saw the whole thing. And Devin," the friend lowered his voice, "you might want to chill on the Cole thing for a while. Chill." "Why would I?" "Because the Hells Angels are paying his hospital bills, you idiot. Because Rocco Lawson personally." The friend actually looked over his shoulder. "Look, my cousin said there were guys in leather sitting outside the kid's grandma's building, watching it. You get what that means? You've been beating on a kid who's now connected. Personally. To the Iron." Devin's grin faltered for the first time in 3 years. It faltered more the next morning, when a man he'd never seen before, big-bearded in a leather vest, leaning against a motorcycle across the street from the school, watched him walk in, and didn't stop watching him, and was still there when he walked out. It faltered more the day after that, when the same man was there again. Nobody ever said a word to Devin Marsh. Nobody threatened him. Nobody had to. The message was the whole point, and Devin received it loud and clear. And Devin Marsh never so much as looked at Ethan Cole sideways again. Which was, Mia explained to Ethan later, exactly how her father did things. "He almost never has to actually do anything," she said, sitting in the hospital chair that had basically become hers, feeding him bites of Jell-O. He was perfectly capable of eating himself, but let her feed him because it made her happy. That's the part people don't get. They think it's all violence. It's mostly just presence. He puts a man where you can see him, and he lets you do the rest to yourself. Your imagination does more work than any threat ever could. She smiled a little grimly. By the time you're actually scared, you've already scared yourself worse than he ever would have. That's kind of terrifying. It's completely terrifying. It's also why I got to grow up alive. She shrugged. There's two sides to everything with my dad, Ethan. The world he's built is dangerous, and it's real, and people have died in it. But that same world just put a guard on your grandmother and made the kid who's been beating you up for 3 years too scared to breathe near you. It's not good, and it's not evil. It's just his. And now it's kind of yours too. Ethan was quiet. "Mia, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "The people who did it. The ones in the car." He picked at the blanket. "Your dad said they're being handled. What does that actually mean? Are they gonna... is he gonna..." Mia set down the Jell-O. "I'm going to tell you the truth," she said carefully. "Because you almost died for me, and you deserve the truth, and I'm not going to be another person who lies to you. I don't know exactly what it means. And honestly, Ethan, I've learned not to ask. Because if I ask, then I know, and if I know, then I'm part of it. And my dad has spent my whole life trying to keep me on the outside of that part. It's the one thing he protects more than my body. He protects my not knowing." Her jaw tightened. "What I can tell you is this. The men who shot you tried to murder his daughter. In my father's world there's a code, and that is the one line you do not cross, and everyone knows it, and they crossed it anyway. So whatever happens to them, they knew the price when they got in that car. They just didn't think they'd have to pay it." Ethan absorbed that. "Does it bother you that you don't know?" "It used to." Mia looked at her hands. "When I was younger, I hated it. I thought he was hiding this monster from me. I thought if I could just see it, I'd understand my own father." She was quiet a moment. "And then when I was 15, I saw a little bit of it. Not on purpose. And I understood why he'd worked so hard to keep me from it. Some things you can't unsee, Ethan. He carries all of it so I don't have to carry any of it. I think that's the most a man like him knows how to say, 'I love you.' He eats the poison so it never gets to me." Her voice went thick. "And now he's doing it for you too. Whatever's happening to those men right now, he's making sure it happens far away from you, so your hands stay clean, so you get to just be the hero who saved a girl, and not the reason 3 men disappeared. That's a gift. It might not feel like one, but it is." And in that moment, 4 floors up in a hospital room, Ethan Cole understood something about the man who'd shaken his hand that he would carry for the rest of his life, that the most dangerous man in the city was also in his own broken and violent way, one of the most loving, and that the 2 things were not opposites but the same thing wearing different faces. He didn't know yet how deep that love ran. He didn't know that even as he lay there, Rocco Lawson was quietly, methodically taking apart the network that had threatened his children, because by now Rocco had 2, though he'd never said it out loud. He didn't know that the hunt had already turned up its first body, or that Tommy's warning about a rat had begun to keep Rocco awake at night, staring at a ceiling, and running down a list of men he'd trusted for 20 years, asking himself which of his brothers had a price. Ethan didn't know any of it. He just knew that for the first time in 17 years, when he woke up scared in the middle of the night, someone was there, and down in the city in a garage that smelled of oil and fear. Danny Reyes, 19 years old. The shooter, the errand boy who'd pulled the trigger because somebody told him it would make his bones make him a man, make him somebody. Sat in the dark with his hands shaking, and understood finally completely that he was already dead. That he'd been dead since the moment the boy in the diner didn't die. That there was nowhere in the whole city he could run that Rocco Lawson couldn't reach. He was right about that. But he was wrong about one thing. He thought he was the one Rocco wanted most. He wasn't. Rocco wanted the man who'd handed him the address, the man who'd watched Mia for weeks, the rat. And that man was still right now walking free, smiling, riding, breaking bread at Rocco's own table, calling him brother. That man's name was Vic Marchetti, and Rocco had known him for 22 years. They'd patched in the same summer. They'd bled together, buried brothers together, sat at the same long table on 100 nights, and voted on the future of the club together. Vic had held baby Mia at her christening. Vic had stood at Rocco's shoulder at his divorce, poured him whiskey, told him it wasn't his fault. If you had asked Rocco 1 week before the shooting to name the 3 men on Earth he trusted most, Vic Marchetti would have been on that list without a second's thought, which was exactly why it took Rocco 11 days to let himself see it. The pattern had been there the whole time, the way Tommy said. Somebody close. Somebody who knew Mia's routine, the diner, the corner, the time, the booth. And Rocco had run the list 100 times, and every time his mind reached Vic's name, it slid right off the way your eye slides off a thing too painful to look at directly. Not Vic. Anybody but Vic. So he'd looked everywhere else first. He'd looked at prospects and hang-arounds and the guys who ran the door at the clubhouse. He'd looked at everyone except the one man he loved like a brother, because looking there meant the ground could open under his whole life. Then Tommy came to him on the 11th night with a phone. VP. Tommy's face was gray. I need you to sit down. I don't sit down. Talk. Danny Reyes talked. Before... Tommy didn't finish. He didn't have to. Before he gave up, who paid him? Who set the whole thing up? Who told the Salucci people exactly where your daughter would be? He held out the phone with a hand that wasn't quite steady. Rocco. I checked it 4 times. I didn't want to bring you this. I swear to God, I didn't want it to be true. Rocco took the phone. He looked at the screen. And Tommy watched the most controlled man he had ever known go absolutely perfectly still, the stillness of a mountain, the instant before it comes down. That's a photo of a text message, Rocco said, and his voice was so level it was frightening. From a burner. To the Salucci crew, giving them the diner, the corner, the time she'd be there. He kept staring at it. And you're telling me that this burner belongs to... The tower data puts that phone in the clubhouse VP, 4 separate nights. It puts it at Vic's house. It puts it... Tommy's voice broke. It's him. It's Vic. He sold her. He sold Mia to the people who tried to kill her. For a long time, Rocco didn't say anything at all. When he finally spoke, it wasn't rage. Tommy had braced for rage. Rage he knew how to be around. What came out of Rocco instead was worse. It was grief raw and enormous. The grief of a man who has just had a piece of his own history die in his hands. 22 years, Rocco said quietly. He held her when she was 3 days old, Tommy. I watched him do it. He was crying. This big, scary son of a... He was crying holding my baby girl telling me she was gonna break hearts. His jaw worked. Why? Give me one reason on this earth. Why? Money. Tommy's voice was flat with disgust. Danny said Vic was into the Salucci people deep, gambling. Been drowning for 2 years, hiding it from everybody. They offered to wipe the whole debt if he gave them away at you. And going through Mia... Tommy couldn't finish it. He knew you'd never see it coming from him. That was the whole plan. Your love for him was the weapon. He counted on you not being able to look at him. And that was the thing that finally moved through Rocco's face and hardened into something permanent. Because Vic hadn't just betrayed him. Vic had weaponized the exact thing that made Rocco human. He'd looked at 22 years of brotherhood and seen a blind spot, and he'd aimed a gun through it at a 17-year-old girl. Does he know we know? Rocco asked. No, he thinks it went sideways because of the kid. He thinks we're still chasing the Salucci crew and the shooter. He's been at the clubhouse every day, VP, riding with us, asking about Mia, asking about the boy in the hospital. Tommy's fists clenched. He asked me yesterday if the kid was gonna make it. To his face. He asked me. Rocco closed his eyes. When he opened them, the grief was gone. It had been folded down and locked away somewhere so deep it would take years to find again. And what was left in its place was the thing the whole city was afraid of, the thing that had earned him the name. Here's how it's going to go, the Iron said. We're going to call church, full table every patch, and Vic's going to be there because Vic always comes because coming is how he keeps proving he's innocent. He pulled his gloves from his belt. And I'm going to let him sit at my table one last time. And then I'm going to put this phone down in the middle of it. And I'm going to watch his face. VP. He looked my daughter's killers in the eye and gave them her address. Tommy. Rocco's voice never rose. The least I can do is look him in the eye when he finds out I know. But that reckoning would have to wait, because 2 days before Rocco called church, something happened that no one had planned for, and it happened at the hospital. Ethan was getting better. Not fast, the lung made everything slow, and there were nights the pain was so bad, Mia stayed until 3 in the morning, just holding his hand through it. But he was healing. He'd started sitting up. He'd started walking the hall, one slow, shuffling lap at a time. One of the leather-vested men always drifting along a few feet behind, pretending not to hover. His grandmother had visited twice now, brought up in a car Rocco sent, and the sight of the old woman weeping and holding her grandson's face in her shaking hands had made even Bear, all 6.5 feet of him, turn and find something very interesting to look at out the window. Ethan had a routine now. Mia in the afternoons, physical therapy in the mornings, and a nurse's aide, a quiet young guy named Cody, who came in the evenings to help him with the things he still couldn't quite manage on his own. Cody had been at the hospital 3 months. Cody was friendly, unremarkable, forgettable, exactly the kind of person nobody looks at twice. Exactly the kind of person Ethan, of all people, should have recognized, because Ethan had spent 17 years being that kind of person. He almost didn't catch it. He was tired, and the pain meds made everything soft at the edges, and Cody was just standing at the foot of the bed one evening, reading his chart the way he always did. But Ethan's whole life had been built on noticing things. The gray sedan, the wrongness in a room, and some old survival instinct sharpened rather than dulled by the bullets made him actually look at Cody's hands. They were shaking. Just slightly. The way a man's hands shake when he's about to do something he doesn't want to do. And Cody wasn't reading the chart. His eyes weren't moving. "You're not really an aide," Ethan heard himself say quiet, before he'd even decided to say it. "Are you?" Cody's head came up, and for 1 second, one single second, the friendly, forgettable face went completely blank, and Ethan saw what was underneath it. And it was fear, and it was resolve, and it was a man who'd been sent to finish a job. "Kid," Cody said softly. "I'm real sorry about this. It's nothing personal. They can't have you talking. You saw the car. You saw the shooter's face. You're the one witness who lived." His hand moved toward his waistband. "It's nothing personal. I got a family. They said if I don't—" "MIA," Ethan shouted, because Mia had just stepped out to the vending machine down the hall because the leather-vested man had followed her to carry the sodas. Because for exactly 90 seconds, Ethan Cole was alone in that room with a man who'd been sent to kill him. And shouting tore something in his half-healed lung, and the pain whited out his vision, and he couldn't get the second breath to shout again. Cody lunged. What happened next happened in 4 seconds, and Ethan would relive it for years. His body, still broken, still stitched together, did the only thing it knew how to do. When death came close, it moved. He rolled hard off the far side of the bed, ripping the IV out of his arm, hitting the floor with a scream he couldn't stop. And Cody came around the bed fast, and there was something in his hand now. Small and metal, and Ethan grabbed the IV pole and swung it with everything he had left, which was almost nothing, and it caught Cody across the face, and bought him 1 more second. And then the door exploded inward and Bear filled the entire frame. Ethan never saw exactly what Bear did. It was too fast and too total. There was a sound like a door slamming, and then Cody was on the floor and not moving, and Bear was standing over him breathing like a bull. And then Mia was screaming Ethan's name and on her knees beside him, where he lay tangled in IV lines with blood spreading through the bandages on his side. And the room was full of leather and shouting and a nurse yelling for a doctor. "I'm okay," Ethan gasped, though he very clearly was not. "Mia, he was gonna—" I know. Don't talk." "Oh my God, Ethan, you're bleeding. You tore something. Don't talk." She was pressing her hands to his side, and her face was white, and her hands were red again, red the way they'd been on the diner floor, and the awful symmetry of it made her start to shake. How did they get someone in here? There were men outside your door. How did they—" The answer came an hour later, after they'd rushed Ethan back into surgery to repair what the fight had torn open after Bear had made a phone call that brought Rocco to the hospital at a dead run after they'd confirmed that Cody had been placed at the hospital months ago, long before the shooting, as an insurance policy. A sleeper. Someone the Salucci people had put in place in case they ever needed a quiet way to reach someone in that hospital. And that fact, that single fact, was what finally broke the case wide open. Because a sleeper placed months in advance meant planning, meant patience, meant an enemy far more careful and far more connected than a couple of low-level shooters in a rented sedan. It meant the Salucci crew had known for a long time that they might one day want a way at Rocco Lawson's world, and someone had been feeding them the access to build it. Someone on the inside. Rocco stood in the hallway outside the operating room where they were for the second time cutting into the boy who'd saved his daughter. And Tommy stood beside him, and Rocco's voice when he finally spoke was the quietest Tommy had ever heard it. "Vic," Rocco said. "VP. The aide was placed 3 months ago. Vic's been drowning in Salucci debt for 2 years. Rocco's eyes were fixed on the operating room doors. "This wasn't one betrayal, Tommy. He didn't sell her once. He's been selling us the whole time. For 2 years he's been handing them pieces, access, names, a way into the hospital we use for God's sake." His hand closed slowly into a fist. "And tonight, they used one of those pieces to try to murder a 17-year-old boy in his hospital bed. A boy whose only crime was saving my daughter's life. What do you want to do?" Rocco was quiet for a long moment. Down the hall, Mia sat alone in a plastic chair, with her head in her hands, waiting for the second time to find out if Ethan Cole would live, and the sight of his daughter like that, brought there twice now, twice by the same rot in his own house, was the thing that finally settled it in Rocco, all the way down to the bone. Call church, the iron said. Tomorrow night, everyone, and Tommy. He turned, and his eyes had gone to something Tommy had only seen a handful of times in 20 years. Something that meant a man's life was already over and just hadn't stopped moving yet. Make sure Vic gets the call personally, from me. I want to hear his voice when I tell him to come home. Ethan came out of surgery at 2 a.m. He'd lost blood-torn stitches, set his recovery back by weeks, but he'd live. The surgeon, the same one from the first night, came out shaking her head with something like awe. That young man, she said, should not keep surviving things. And he keeps surviving things. I've stopped trying to explain it. Mia was allowed in at 3. She pulled her chair to the bed. She took his hand. And when Ethan drifted up out of the anesthesia, the first thing he saw was her face. And the first thing he did was try to make sure she was okay. And that the fact that a boy who'd just been hunted in his own hospital bed woke up worried about somebody else was the thing that finally broke Mia Lawson completely open. Stop it, she wept. Stop worrying about me. It's always me. It's always somebody else. When do you get to be the one who matters, Ethan? When? I told you, he whispered, barely awake. You mattering is me mattering now. That's how it works. When you have somebody. I never had that before. I don't know how to do it any other way. If something happened to you, it wouldn't matter if I was fine. Mia put her face against his hand and cried until there was nothing left. And somewhere across the city, in a house he'd lived in for 15 years, Vic Marchetti's phone rang, and he looked at the screen and saw Rocco, and he felt his stomach drop because Rocco didn't call. Rocco showed up, and a call meant something formal, something table-related, and Vic answered with a voice he worked hard to make easy. Brother, it's late. Everything okay? Church tomorrow night, Rocco said. Full table. I need everybody there, Vic, especially you. Yeah, what's it about? And there was a pause on the line, a pause that went on just a half-second too long, and in that half-second, Vic Marchetti felt the first cold finger of real fear touch the back of his neck. It's about family, Rocco said quietly. Somebody in ours forgot what that word means, and tomorrow night at my table, I'm going to remind them. Another pause. You'll be there, won't you, brother? Vic's mouth had gone dry. Course I will, Rocco. Course, where else would I be? Good, said the iron. I'd hate for you to miss it. The line went dead, and Vic Marchetti sat alone in the dark of his house phone, still in his hand, and understood the way Danny Reyes had understood in that garage. The way Cody had understood the instant Bear filled the doorway, that the walls had already closed. That there was nowhere left to run, that Rocco couldn't reach. That the debt he'd tried to escape by selling a little girl's life had finally fully come due. He thought about running. He thought about it all night. But Vic Marchetti had ridden with Rocco Lawson for 22 years, and he knew better than anyone alive that you did not run from the iron. You did not get to run. There was only the table, and whatever waited for you there, and the long, cold understanding that you had done it all to yourself. The next night, every patch in the charter rode home to church, and Vic Marchetti, pale and sweating and smiling a smile that fooled no one, rode home with them home to the table where a man who loved him like a brother was waiting with a phone and a photograph, and the whole terrible truth already laid out in the middle of the wood. The table was old oak scarred by 20 years of elbows and glasses and hard decisions, and every man who wore the patch had a seat at it. And tonight, every seat was full. Rocco sat at the head where he always sat, and he was calm in a way that made the whole room uneasy, because they didn't know why they'd been called. Only that. The iron's face had that stillness, and men who'd ridden with him a long time knew that stillness, the way sailors know a flat sea before a storm. Vic sat 4 chairs down on the left. He'd taken that chair for 22 years. He was smiling and joking with the man beside him, and only Rocco, watching from the head of the table without seeming to watch, could see the sweat at his hairline, the way his hand kept drifting to his glass and not drinking. All right, Rocco said, and the room went quiet. "Thank you for coming home, all of you. I know it was short notice." He folded his hands on the wood. "Most of you know what happened at Old Joe's 3 weeks ago. Somebody put 4 bullets into a 17-year-old kid trying to get at my daughter. And most of you know that same somebody sent a man into the hospital 2 nights ago to finish the boy in his bed." A low sound moved around the table. Anger. These were hard men, but there were lines, and going after a kid who'd saved a girl crossed all of them. "We've been hunting the ones who did it," Rocco went on. "The shooter, the driver, the Salucci people who ordered it. And we've found most of them. That work's being finished. But there was always a piece that didn't fit." He looked slowly down the table. "Because to get at Mia, they had to know where she'd be. What corner, what time, what booth, for weeks. And to put a sleeper in our hospital months before any of this, they had to have a way in. A door. Somebody holding that door open for 2 years. The room had gone very, very still. Somebody at this table," Rocco said, "sold my daughter. Nobody breathed. 20-some men, and you could have heard a match strike. And Vic Marchetti, God help him, Vic tried. Vic did the thing a guilty man always does, which is to react a half-second too fast and a half-inch too much." "Rocco," he said, and his voice was full of the right outrage. "The practiced kind who would tell me who, and I'll go get him myself, brother. I'll—" "Sit down, Vic." Vic hadn't stood up, but he sat down anyway harder, and the whole table saw it, and the whole table began one by one to understand. Rocco reached into his vest. He took out a phone. He set it in the middle of the old oak table screen up, and he slid it slowly down the wood until it stopped in front of Vic Marchetti. "That's a text," Rocco said quietly. "From a burner. To the Salucci crew. It gives them the diner, the corner, the time. Everything they needed to kill my little girl." His gray eyes never left Vic's face. "The tower data puts that burner in this clubhouse. In your house. In your hand, Vic. 4 separate nights." Vic stared at the phone. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. 22 years, Rocco said, and for the first time, the iron cracked just barely, just enough for the grief underneath to show through. "You held her when she was 3 days old. You cried, Vic. I watched you cry, holding my baby. And then you sold her address to men with guns to pay off a card table." His voice dropped to almost nothing. "Look at me. You're going to look at me while you tell me why." And Vic Marchetti cornered, drowning 22 years of brotherhood collapsing into rubble around him. Did the last desperate thing a cornered man does. He stopped pretending. "You don't know what it's like," he said, and his voice shook with something that was almost rage. "You don't, Rocco, because everything always goes right for you. The club, the respect, the everything. And I was drowning. 2 years I was drowning. And not one of you noticed, not one of you asked, because I was always just good old Vic, always fine. And the Salucci people, they had a number on me that I was never going to climb out of, never. And they said nobody had to get hurt. They said it was just leverage. Just a way to lean on you. They said nobody would get hurt." His face twisted. "I didn't know they'd actually, I swear to God I didn't think they'd actually shoot at her, Rocco. I thought, you thought." Rocco's voice was deadly soft. "You handed loaded men the exact spot my 17-year-old daughter would be sitting, and you told yourself a story where that ends gentle. You looked at her whole life and you saw a number to pay off." He stood up slowly from the head of the table. "There's a boy in a hospital bed right now, Vic. Second time under the knife. A kid who never had a nickel or a name, and he crossed a whole room the wrong way to put his own body over hers for nothing for a stranger because he saw she was alone. He didn't even know her." Rocco's voice broke and steadied. "And you knew her whole life, and you sold her anyway. That's the difference between that boy and you. That's the whole difference between a man and whatever you turned into." Vic had no answer. There was no answer. "You're out," Rocco said. "You're out of the club. You're out of my life. And what happens to you now isn't mine to decide alone, because you didn't just betray me. You betrayed every patch at this table, and every one of them gets a say." He looked around the oak. "But I'll tell you what I decided about my own part. I'm not going to be the one who does it. Because if I put my hands on you, Vic, it won't be justice. It'll be me, and my daughter deserves better than her father becoming that in her name." He turned away. "Take him." They took him. Rocco never said what happened to Vic Marchetti after that night, and Mia never asked, and Ethan never asked either. Some things a family carries so the ones they love don't have to. But the man who'd sold a little girl's life was never seen in that city again, and the Salucci crew that had reached for Rocco Lawson through his children was over the weeks that followed taken apart so completely and so quietly that other men in that world took note and understood the lesson and never in their lives forgot it. You did not touch what belonged to the iron. There was no debt worth that price. There was no card table that paid it off, and that was the end of the danger. But it was not the end of the story, because the story was never really about the men in the sedan or the rat at the table. It was about a boy who had spent 17 years being invisible and what happens to a ghost when a whole world decides all at once to see him. Ethan came home from the hospital on a cold, bright morning 6 weeks after the shooting, and he did not come home to the empty apartment and the shaking grandmother and the state paperwork. He came home to a building where a man in a leather vest nodded at him from across the street, and a refrigerator someone had quietly filled, and a grandmother whose medications were sorted into a little plastic box by a kind woman who came twice a day and who wept when she saw him walk through the door on his own 2 feet. "My boy," she kept saying, holding his face. "Oh, my boy, look at you. You're walking. Look at you." "I'm okay, Grandma. I'm okay." That man. She meant Rocco. She'd met him once when he'd come personally to her apartment to tell her, hat literally in his hands, that her grandson was a hero and that she would never want for anything again. That man, Ethan. He sat right there in that chair, and he held my hand, and he told me he said my grandson did the bravest thing he ever saw, and that I raised you right. She was crying. "Nobody ever told me I raised you right. 17 years, baby. I did it scared every single day, and that man sat in my kitchen and told me I did it right." Ethan had to turn away because it was too much. Mia came every day. That never changed. What changed was everything around it, the way it stopped being a girl visiting a boy in a hospital and became just 2 people who had decided without ever quite saying it out loud that they were going to be in each other's lives now permanently, and that the deciding was already done. They didn't talk about it. They didn't need to. It had been settled on a diner floor with his blood between them, and everything after was just the 2 of them slowly catching up to a thing that was already true. "You know what's strange?" Ethan said one afternoon months later when he was strong again, when the scars had faded to pale silver lines, and he could breathe deep without it catching. They were sitting on the roof of his building where they'd taken to going. "I used to pray to be invisible. I used to think if I could just get through it head down, don't get noticed, take care of Grandma, survive, that was the whole goal, survive and not be seen." He looked out over the city. "And then I got seen, all at once, in the worst possible way, and it turned out being seen was the thing I'd been starving for my whole life and didn't even know it." "You were never invisible to me," Mia said. "Not even that first day. I noticed you the same day you noticed me. I'd learned not to let anybody see that I noticed anything, because every time I did it cost me." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You were the first person in a year I let myself actually look at. And then 2 weeks later you took 4 bullets for me, so..." She laughed softly. "I'd say my instincts were good. The change at school was total, and it wasn't only fear. Though there was fear, Devon Marsh had transferred out by spring, and the others who'd made a sport of Ethan for 3 years found that they could no longer quite meet his eyes and gave him a wide, respectful, permanent berth. But it was more than that. Word had spread of what he'd done, the real story, the diner and the bullets and the girl, and something shifted in how the whole school saw him. He wasn't the ghost anymore. He was the kid who'd run toward the gun. And it turned out that when people finally looked at Ethan Cole, what they found was worth looking at. Quiet, yes, but steady and kind and possessed of a spine of pure iron that nobody had ever bothered to notice under the gray hoodie. He graduated at the top of his class. Rocco Lawson sat in the third row in a collared shirt he clearly hated next to Ethan's grandmother, and when Ethan's name was called, and the boy walked across that stage, the iron stood up and clapped like it was his own son, because by then, in every way that mattered, it was. Because here is the thing that had happened slowly over those months, without anyone deciding it in words, Ethan Cole had become family. It wasn't a patch. Ethan wasn't a member. Rocco was firm on that gentle but immovable the one door he kept closed. That life isn't for you, he told the boy more than once. You've got a mind and a future, and I didn't spend all this keeping you alive so you could throw it into my world. You're going to college. You're going to be somebody in the daylight. That's an order, and it's the one order I'll never take back. But there was another thing older than patches that a man like Rocco could give, and one evening at the clubhouse with the whole charter gathered, he gave it. He handed Ethan a vest, not a member's cut. Something else, something rarer, that in 22 years Rocco had bestowed only a handful of times. On the back, stitched in the club's own hand, were words that meant more in that world than money or blood or fear. Friend of the club. You understand what this is, Rocco said, and the room was silent, every patch watching. This isn't a toy. This is a promise from every man in this room that puts our whole world between you and anything that ever tries to hurt you again. As long as you live, wherever you go, you get in trouble in any city in this country, you say this charter's name, and men you've never met will come for you. He set his hand on Ethan's shoulder, heavy and certain. You gave my daughter her life, so we're giving you ours. That's the trade. That's the only trade I know how to make that comes close to even. His voice thickened just slightly, just enough. Welcome home, son. And Ethan Cole, the invisible boy. The ghost who kept walking around the kid who could have disappeared and no one would have noticed. For a week stood in a room full of the most dangerous men in the city and understood that he would never be alone again for the rest of his life. He did go to college. Rocco saw to it, not with strings pulled, but with the weight lifted. The grandmother cared for the bills gone, so that a brilliant kid who'd never had a chance finally had nothing standing between him and what his mind could do. He studied hard. He came home on weekends, and every time he came home, Mia was there, and Rocco was there, and the roof of the old building was there, and the family that had grown up around him out of the worst afternoon of his life was there, waiting permanent real. Years passed. Ethan grew into a man, tall now, steady, the pale scars on his chest and side. The only reminder of the day, everything changed. He and Mia were married on a spring afternoon, with the whole charter in attendance, 100 motorcycles lined up gleaming in the sun, and Rocco Lawson walked his daughter down the aisle, and then when he reached the end, did something that made grown men in leather wipe their eyes. He took Ethan's hand and pulled the boy into an embrace and held him there a long moment and whispered something only Ethan heard. Nobody ever knew what Rocco said. Ethan never told. But Mia saw her husband's face when her father let him go, and she knew whatever it was, it had been the thing Ethan had waited his whole life to hear from a father, from any father, and had never once expected to. And Rocco watching the two of them dance that night. His daughter who'd turned to ice to survive his world warm and laughing and whole. And the boy who'd had nothing and no one, and had run toward a gun anyway, finally understood the thing that had been forming in him since he knelt in a stranger's blood on a diner floor and took off his gloves. He'd spent his whole life afraid of what the world might do to Mia. He'd fortified her with fear and distance and armed men, and none of it had ever let him sleep. And in the end, the thing that made his daughter safe wasn't a weapon or a threat or the name that made a city tremble. It was a poor, quiet, invisible boy who had looked across a room, seen that she was alone, and decided without knowing her name, without wanting a single thing in return, that her life was worth more than his own. The safest man for his daughter was the one who had never asked for her. The one who would have given everything and expected nothing. The one who ran toward the gun. Rocco Lawson had spent his whole life learning how to know things. And on that spring night, watching his family dance, he finally knew the most important one. Courage isn't loud, and it isn't for sale, and it doesn't ask permission, It simply moves 12 feet across a room toward the thing everyone else is running from. Ethan Cole had been invisible for 17 years. But on the day it mattered most, he was the only one in the world who could be seen. And he was never, ever invisible again.